Hey everyone, Turtles here. I think I'm gonna wait off on doing chest updates probably until a month post-op, just because like things don't really seem to be changing that fast. But I thought in the meantime I would share my thoughts on a couple of other topics. And one of the first ones that came to mind was passing. I think this is a pretty big issue that probably deserves to be talked about a little bit more in, for us as a trans community in general, but especially on YouTube, given how many videos there are of, people either suggesting, passing tips that have helped them pass, or there's also a lot I've seen of response videos to those, kind of critiquing, trends that they see in those videos, or just more about like the concept of passing in general. Just to give you some insight as to where I'm coming from with this, even though I'm not like 100% clear on the gender identity front, I'm somebody for whom it's actually really important and like validating for me to be perceived in public as male. Like whenever I interact with a stranger, I feel much, much better if I can tell that they're gendering me as male versus female. So it's something that's like a personal issue for me, so I'm sort of partly speaking in my own experience here, but also just like a lot of thinking that I've done on the topic. For reference, I'm drawing a lot from an article written by Natalie Reed, who's like one of my favorite trans feminist bloggers. I highly, highly recommend, and I will put a link to her article on the subject of passing below. But this is not meant as a response to any video in particular. I don't want to single anybody out. It's really just more some of my thoughts on, issues with both. I mean, I think I have issues kind of both with, some of the videos that propose passing tips, and also some of the response points that I've seen to those. But like I said, not meant to single out anyone in particular. I would love to hear everyone else's thoughts on the topic, since I think everyone kind of has a different experience and a different take on it, so I really like hearing different people's experiences and different people's thoughts about the subject. First of all, I'd just like to talk a little bit about how I guess I have some problems with, like, the idea of passing, just even in theory, like, especially in the kind of the way that it's framed and the language that we use to talk about it. I think, like, the number one issue with it is the sort of like grammatical construction of it. Like, if I say I'm passing, or I passed today in X or Y interaction, like that's really suggesting that like I'm the active subject here. I'm the one who's responsible for like the result of that interaction. Where I think that's actually kind of a really problematic thing. I mean, it might be more accurate to describe like passing. I mean, because we use this term when someone, for instance, calls us sir or calls us ma'am, or interacts with us in a way that's clearly indicated that they've perceived us as a particular gender. So although obviously like our actions, our presentation forms like have some influence as far as how people perceive us, like ultimately the person doing the perceiving is always the person we're interacting with. So in a way, it might make more sense to talk about being gendered, male or female, or I don't know, something else if that's possible, So I think in general, like, it's just kind of a very strong and understandable human tendency to want to feel like you have some agency, like in your actions in your life and the way you're perceived. But I think this can be kind of a dangerous thing in that it kind of puts all of the responsibility on us for interactions that frankly we can't always control. I mean, the end of the day, like, you can do all you want, but I mean the hard truth is that you can't have total control over the way someone perceives you, and that could be due to lots of things. I mean, the issue of I mean, there's so many variables involved in passing, right? I mean, it's like every single one of your physical characteristics that's perceived as sexed in as male or female, there's all kinds of different physical features that might lead someone to perceive you in a certain way. There's all kinds of like modes of like presentation, and there's all sorts of modes of behavior, and there's all sorts of things that you would talk about. I mean, there's just so many things. Your name, if you give that at all, just all sorts of clues and indications that lead someone to make that split-second judgment. So I just think it's a little bit, it's hard because it can really easily lead to us blaming either others or ourselves for not passing when it's something that we can't always control. So, I mean, I think although it can be kind of hard to accept that sometimes fully, like, I mean, even if you sort of recognize it in theory that you're not totally responsible for how people perceive you, it can still be easy to sort of take full responsibility for that, even if you know it's kind of illogical on some level. But you know what I mean? Like, although it can be hard to recognize that, I think it can also be a comforting thing in that, you know, if you are able to sort of, you know, give up, like, you know, a total dependence on considering yourself fully responsible for how everyone interacts with you, that can be kind of liberating in a way. There's also just kind of some semantic things. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm talking like like a lit nerd here, but that's what I am. You know, just like the fact that what's the antonym of pass? Fail. Again, this kind of like reinforces the idea that we're the ones who are like either responsible for winning or losing this particular game. Also, like, you know, pass, like, historically has usually been used of, like, you know, people who are trying to, for instance, like, pass as a different race or, you know, some other social class or some other aspect, you know, to which, like, they don't belong but are trying to be perceived as. And, you know, even the sort of resemblance of the term pass to, like, passing off. Like, you know, if I say, I pass as a man, that kind of implies to someone who hasn't really thought a lot about this or isn't really familiar with the terminology that, like, I'm not, you know? And so it can be, yeah, that also is sort of a problematic aspect of the term. It implies deception. It has a basic sort of implication that, you know, we're lying somehow, which is just like, I mean, I can talk about this a lot more too, but I mean, that's just kind of something that's so endemic already to the trans experience that it would really suck if we were somehow reinforcing cis people's perceptions. You know, obviously not all cis people have that, you know, think of it that way, but, you know, cis people who aren't that trans friendly, their perceptions about, you know, what our lives and our identities are like. I think one of the problems that I have with, like, specifically, like, certain lists of passing tips I've seen, again, not all, and certain, you know, videos suggesting advices for how to pass, is that it tends to be, you know, the advice that people tend to give tends to fall along, like, one particular pattern of presentation, and I mean, again, this is kind of a human trait. I mean, it's understandable, you know, we tend to universalize our experiences and assume that everyone else kind of feels the same way we do, wants the same things, and wants to be perceived in the same ways, but that's not always the case. I mean, in the first case, not everyone really cares about passing that much. It's not a priority to all trans people. So there's that. And then secondly, just, you know, the same passing tips, the same set of, you know, recommended presentations are just not going to work for everyone. I mean, whether it's on a sort of level that, like, this doesn't feel authentic to me. Like, I just don't want to wear a polo shirt and have a kind of, like, straight, you know, I don't know, certain kind of haircut that looks preppy enough to not be perceived as dykey or something like that. You know, I mean, I'm sort of being facetious here, but, you know, like, the same things are not going to work for everyone on a level that feels authentic to them, and the same things are not even going to be practically helpful to everyone. I mean, I think, for instance, Desto made a really great point in his video response to, you know, sets of passing tips that, like, these things are influenced a lot by culture, for instance. So, you know, what works in one cultural context in one neighborhood, like, really isn't going to work for you in another cultural context in another neighborhood. You know, I mean, I think that there are certain things that, like, yeah, we can say in general they'll help somebody, like, binding, probably going to help you. Wearing a dress, probably not going to help you. I mean, there may be exceptions, but, you know, so we can make generalizations, but I think we have to be pretty careful, or we should be pretty careful about how we're framing the advice that we give, and just to be really upfront about the fact that, you know, what works for one person doesn't always work for another, and our experiences just really aren't always the same.